Hey guys, it's Caspian here. I wanted to go ahead and do a reading wrap up for the month of February. I would say it's the month of February plus a couple days in March. I'm a big library book reader, so I have a lot of these books due any minute now. So I want to just go ahead and knock this first reading wrap up. First book I read this month was China Room by Sunjeev Sahota. And this is a historical fiction dual timeline novel set in rural Punjab in India in two different time and two different eras. One is in 1929, where we follow Mehar, who is a teenage bride married off to a family of three brothers. She is unable to ascertain the identity of her husband. She's never seen him before, as she's made to wear sort of a traditional veil over her face at all times when interacting with any of the men, including her husband. She has limited interactions with him. Her interactions are limited to serving him tea, in which she's able to hear voices but not see him, and as well being summoned by her husband at night into a room where she's made to have sex with him and produce children. Her situation is a little bit dystopic given the circumstances. She doesn't have full autonomy of her body, and so she makes do with what she has, and uses her resources, her senses of touch, her hearing, in order to find out more information about who her husband is. Our second character is a descendant of Mehar, who we pick up with 70 years later, who is an unnamed male character who's about 18 or 19 years old. He is visiting India from the UK. He is a UK immigrant, and he is sort of dealing with the ravages of drug withdrawal on his body at the time when he's visiting India. He is visiting his family and has some trouble, some conflict with his aunt. And so upon this conflict, he extricates himself from that situation and moves to the family farm in the country, where he sort of is going to spend the rest of his days sort of recovering, letting his body recover, as he's also processing the traumatic events and reflecting on the traumatic events of his youth related to xenophobia directed towards his family, acts of violence directed towards them, and sort of the effects of an immigrant life in a country that has inherent biases directed towards communities of color. And as he is beginning to explore this farmhouse, he has questions about his great-grandmother and her life on the farm, as he begins to sort of fix up this farmhouse and start painting walls and really begins a process of self-reflection. And this book, as you can see by the cover, has these sort of browns and these oranges and these blues, and it really is shown in the visual language of this novel. There are scenes of characters staring off into the distance, where there's sort of mist rising. In the distance, there are it's the orange sun beating down on them as it's setting. The brown red dirt underfoot, and all of that has this really evocative sort of effect on the reader as the characters are moving throughout their lives, as they are escaping their situation or contemplating their lives, feeling trapped, feeling that they can't escape. And Sahota really does a great job of portraying in a setting and an environment that to different people are different things. One is a prison, the other is a welcome respite from busy city life, and in a really beautiful way. And I felt like it really helped with the sort of reflective nature, evoking that sort of reflective nature and contemplative processes that these characters are thinking through and going through. I really enjoyed this book. It is definitely it's a mix of plot-driven elements with character development, but it's definitely more of a character development sort of book. contemplative about life and about the meaning of freedom, and autonomy as well, in a world that is seemingly limiting and constricting, with its sort of mores and societal norms, whether it's in the 20th century or in, on the brink of the 21st. And so I really connected with this novel, and I definitely recommend it. The next book I read was a book that I picked up based on the cover purely. It's a short story collection and novella called Last of Her Name by Mimi Locke. I haven't read a lot of short story collections, but it reminded me a lot of one short story collection I read a number of years ago, which was Jhumpa Lahiri's Unaccustomed Earth. And it reminded me about, this book reminded me of that book in a few ways. These characters we have here are from all different segments of society in the Cantonese diaspora. So characters who lived in at one point or traveled from and live elsewhere, from Hong Kong, particularly. These characters are characters who are seeking something that they feel is missing in their lives, whether it's human connection, whether it's purpose, or closure, usually in the form of another person. So, like Unaccustomed Earth, the endings of these stories aren't necessarily neat. They aren't happy endings, but Mimi Locke is really great at having a finality to a story that doesn't linger with you. My days were never, I never left with sadness after any of these stories were finished, which I really appreciate. Whether the even if the end product is a positive one and the story is great, I feel like some authors sometimes just can't help themselves with how sad they want a reader to be once the story is over, which sometimes is an issue if you don't know quite what you're getting into at the beginning of any story. So she does a really great job of making these really engaging stories with characters such as set in a wide variety of settings. We have 1980s UK suburbia, World War II Hong Kong, and urban California. And each of these stories is affecting. Some of them are short, some of them are a little longer, and most of them don't end in a happy ending, but are super affecting. And I felt a curiosity turning each page to find out what happens next. And this book has really turned me on to reading more short story collections. I have a book haul that I'm going to be posting in a few days, and I have a short story collection that I kept in mind to get because this book really turned me on to exploring more short story collections from authors that I really enjoy reading. The next book I read, it gave me a lot to think about. It, for me, lived up to the hype, thankfully. It's a book I've wanted to read for a while. It is Emma Cline's The Girls. If you're at all familiar with the Manson murders of the 1960s, this book is heavily inspired by those events. We follow our main character, Evie Boyd, who is on the cusp of entering high school. She's in the summer before high school, and this takes place actually in 1969, the summer of love, in the summer. And this is a character study of a girl whose foundational bedrocks in her life are crumbling ever, one after another. So her parents have divorced recently, and she's had some falling outs with her friends, in an age that is so fraught with anxiety and second guessing yourself in relation to other girls and adolescent boys as well. This is a character study, like I said, almost like emotional psychological portrait of a vulnerable girl who falls in with a group of girls who are part of a sort of a cult led by a very charismatic male leader. Obviously, from the Manson murders and that tragedy, we can assume that It gets a little darker from there. Acts of desperation happen, acts of violence happen, and Evie is sort of in that sort of swirl of events. We pick up with her in middle age as she's reflecting on that part of her life. And I found this book to be super affecting. You know, some of the plot points in here feel as if I'd seen them before. The dissolution of a marriage, falling out with friends, but everything else that is filled in those events is so insightful, and wholly original in the writing that Emma Cline's voice is so distinctive, I feel like, and her insights about experiences as an adolescent girl dealing with other girls, what female friendships are at that age, them dealing with adolescent boys as well, I thought was really insightful. This book has a lot to say, and I am looking forward to what else Emma Cline publishes because and writes about, because I really found this a lot to think about and a lot to chew over with this book. So this is Emma Cline's The Girls. The next book I read this month was Assembly by Natasha Brown. This book gave me so much to think about. It's a little small, but it really is really affecting. This book centers around an unnamed Black woman living in the UK who, by all accounts, is a success story. She is a daughter, I believe, of immigrants who have sacrificed in order for her to have the opportunity to progress up the ladder economically in the UK. She works at a bank or a financial company and is touted as a success story. So she is a representative for her company as she visits girls' schools to inspire them to join the financial field in their future. And at the same time is wondering if it's all worth it. Even though she is a success outwardly, she has a financial planner, she is making lots of money, she has a boyfriend who is politically connected, who is sort of old money in UK society. She knows all the right people. She feels in many ways as if she is a cog in a machine entrenched with systematic racism and biases towards white men in particular. She feels as if the state is profiting off of her pain, off of her body, and reflects on many instances of microaggressions, and reflects on the sort of dread she has seemingly walking on eggshells at her workplace, dealing with race, and sort of trying to have dignity with how she interacts with particularly men in power in her workplace and in her life. This book picks up about a day or day and a half time period where she is visiting her boyfriend's family at their country estate in the north, and again sort of navigating a space that didn't necessarily ever make room for her. This book feels almost born out of conversations had within the Black community for years, but particularly 2020 at a societal level. And I think it's really timely and conversations. It feels as if we're having these conversations now, and I really glad that books like this exist. And I'm very curious to see what Natasha Brown is going to be writing about next. She shares a lot of similarities with the narrator in the sense that she spent a decade also working in financial services, having experience being a minority in a very cutthroat, high-paying economic sort of sector. And so you know, I want to hear what that perspective is going to do next, and how she relates to the world, and how her characters will relate to the world in her future books. And I hope she continues to write more books, because this gave me a lot to think about. The next book I read is a book that also is short and very affecting. It ripped my heart out towards the end. This is At Dusk by Hwang Sok-yong, translated from the Korean by Sora Kim Russell. Like I said, this book ripped my heart out. It is a book tackling the questions and themes of modernization, particularly in South Korea, since the Korean War era, since the post-war era. We pick up with our main character, Park Min-woo, who, like, you know, the fortunes of South Korea since the post-war period, has also succeeded. He is an architect, you know, dealing with, you know, government contracts and commercial construction, and is by all accounts a success, a Korean success story. His personal life seems to be in shambles. His wife is estranged from him, living with his kids in the United States, who he hasn't seen in almost 10 years. Many of his contemporaries are being investigated for corruption, and he begins to wonder if maybe he went about life sort of the wrong way. I love the description here. In the evening of his life, a wealthy man begins to wonder if he might have missed the point. And as he's beginning to sort of question the direction of his life and his priorities, we see how his life was influenced by the post-war period, the slums in which he was living, the hardscrabble life and circumstances of his upbringing, how that influenced him to be a success story, but how he was maybe a part of the modernization, and subsequently the process of people being left behind by that modernization. Economic success on paper, more economic, democratic opportunities for the collective, and how that affects our society's sort of definition of community. What is community like when you don't have many resources to work with, versus what is community and what is the importance of community when a society is much more equitable as a whole, at least on paper. This book is deceptively simple. It has very plain language, and it seems to be going in a certain direction, and there are narrative strands that are separate but connect and are married in such an effective way about 3/4 of the way through this book. I appreciated the spotlight on the people who've fallen behind, the people who fall into the cracks, who get left behind by modernization, who by all accounts do everything right, whether they go to college, whether they're upstanding citizens. We really delve into the mental health effects of people who are in a modern society like Seoul. I live in Los Angeles, and I grew up here. And the effects of the housing market, the housing boom, commercial real estate investment in Southern California has really affected many middle-class people in ways that are negative. You know, the homelessness issue in America, particularly the West Coast, in major cities like Los Angeles, has given people who visit, who work and live here, a constant visual reminder of the negative effects of seeming economic advancement. And so I connected with this novel on a multitude of different levels. I found this to be super affecting, like I said. And if you've read any of Hwang Sok-yong, please let me know what you think about his books in the comments below, because I really enjoyed this book, and I know Hwang Sok-yong has been particularly prolific in the last 10 years or so, writing books. And so I'm really keen on reading some more of his books. The final book I read this month was Lionel Shriver's Should We Stay or Should We Go? This was one of the more interesting books and actually enjoyable books that I've read this year. Given the weightiness of the themes discussed in this book, I do hope to do this book justice in my description. As a trigger warning, this book and this discussion will hit on topics of suicide, dying with dignity, and death. So if that is a trigger for you, please skip ahead in the video. That said, this book follows two characters, Kay and Cyril Wilkinson, who are in their 50s. They are medical professionals, and they are also dealing with elderly parents in sort of the throes of dementia and Alzheimer's related illnesses. Particularly Kay's father, who's been suffering from dementia for the past 10 years. When this book picks up, has been a traumatic experience for her and her family. She is emotionally wrung out, and his death, her father's death, inspires a conversation with her husband about dying with dignity, having control over how they are to leave this realm when the time comes. And by the end of this conversation, they are in agreement that they will both die by suicide together when they turn 80 years old. They are 50 when the conversation happens at the beginning of the book. And so the book follows, the story follows both characters over the 30-year period and up until their 80th birthday, and then answers the question, what happens next? This book answers that question a couple different times, I believe 9 or 10 times, as we get to about the 70-page mark, with all the setup and everything coming before it. We find out what happens next. But past that point, there are, I believe, about 8 different chapters in here, each a self-contained sort of short story of an alternate future for Kay and Cyril, exploring different possible futures for them based on their decisions to stay or go. For example, it describes it as, were they to cut life artificially short, what would they miss out on? Something terrific or something terrible? Might they end up in a home, a fabulous luxury retirement village, or a cuckoo's nest type home? Might being demented end up being rather fun? What sort of future for humanity awaits? This book has a couple different futures, and it almost gets into some speculative sort of sci-fi fiction territory. We get into a future where there are anti-aging pills and humanity can live for thousands of years, and what happens to our relationship with time when you can live seemingly forever, go on every vacation conceivable to the mind, and learn every language, and explore every career path. This book deals with weighty issues, like I said, of suicide and dying with dignity, but the writing style in this book is almost light. There's a light touch to everything. There's almost a sense of absurd humor about the proceedings. These characters are very human. They're not so necessarily philosophizing or highfalutin in any way. They are sort of a normal, everyday couple who are committed to each other, but are also sort of bumbling in their own way. And they are unmistakably flawed human beings. Like I said, Lionel Shriver inserts a playfulness to the proceedings in this book, and balances it so respectfully and so interestingly against the backdrop of the issues that this book is discussing. So I found this a very, very entertaining, and I really recommend this book. This is a book I think I will revisit again very soon. I don't normally revisit books, but this book is a great romp. in many ways. I know it's kind of an odd way to describe it, but it was a pleasant surprise, and I highly recommend Should We Stay or Should We Go? Definitely. In the month of February, I checked out a total of 9 books. I DNF'd 3 books and read a total of 6 books. Of the 6 books, I read 1,567 pages. I read 1 short story collection and 5 novels, and I'm including Natasha Brown's Assembly as a novel as well, even though it's about 100 pages. I read 5 books under 300 pages and 1 book over 300 pages. And I'm including some light stats here at the end of the video in an effort to be transparent and to have sort of a public record of my reading habits. Going forward, I probably will not be releasing monthly reading wrap-ups as I've read 6 books in a month. I don't have the superpower of reading stacks on stacks on stacks of books, which I wish I had, but going forward, I will be releasing most likely weekly sort of bookish weeks, reviewing any books that I've recently hauled, that I'm keen to start on, books that I'm currently reading that I have thoughts on, and books that I finished that I want to share my thoughts on. I will probably be inserting those stats on a monthly basis, I think, as well. I also may include towards the end of these weekly videos just sort of other relevant or interesting pieces of media I've consumed in that week, whether it's a song I liked, a podcast I've listened to, or just thoughts on a TV show that I have thoughts on that I can't express any other way. So that being said, those thoughts will be brief. This is a bookish channel, so a lot of the content will be definitely literary and focused on all things bookish. So thank you for making it through the end of this video, and I'll see you guys later.